Good morning. I'm on. Good. I am getting better at this little thing. But we are looking at continuing on with the story of Gideon toward the end of chapter 8 here, verses 22 through 28, if you're looking at your own copy of the scriptures. That's Judges 8, 23 through 28. And I'll start reading there at verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Yet Gideon said to them, "I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil." For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, "We will surely give them." So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neck bands that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. The fighting is over here as we look at this portion of Scripture. Gideon is victorious. The Midianites and Amalekites are defeated, pretty much destroyed. And as he is settling accounts, you could say, putting things in place, saw him doing some of that previously in chapter 8 with the men of Succoth and others. Now the men of Israel come to him with a request, saying, "Rule over us." And they're not just asking him to rule over them, but your sons and your son's son. Okay? And I don't know about you, but that sounds like trying to start a dynasty to me. Okay? This word for ruling is having dominion, reigning like a monarch. There's an emphasis here. Okay? It's also interesting, this is the first time this word appears in Judges. Something that Brent and Deacon and I have discussed about Judges is you have a procession going on here, an unfortunate proceeding of development, whereas each time around with Judges, things are getting worse. Okay? You know, you've seen the circle where they follow the gods, they repent, God rescues them, and they're kind of restored. Well, I would say each time the circle gets a little lower on how far they're going. And things are decaying in the book of Judges. And so this is the first time this word rule over us in that manner appears in the book of Judges. Okay. Things are getting worse, and they want a monarchy. Doesn't say much for kingships and monarchy, does it? This is not a term you'd have for having an election or a democracy, but a dynasty. And why do they want to do this? Because you have delivered us, Gideon, from the hand of Midian. Okay? There's a big failure here on Israel's part to recognize what really, really happened. Okay? Failing to see God as the deliverer, and Gideon was just his means, his tool, his servant. Okay? Something I think we need to consider, I hadn't got this down in my notes, but something in the time of around election we definitely need to consider. Okay? We've just had a major election. Okay? Who is the deliverer? Who's really in charge? Okay? I appreciate what Sister Saldana put in the group chat. I'm not real good with those things, okay? So I got to be careful how I describe it. But what she put in there, right on, Right on. We need to remember that. And so they're saying, rule over us, you and your sons. They're dazzled, as one commentator says here, they're dazzled with the success of a man who was only an instrument in the hands of God to deliver them from their enemies. Now they wish to throw off the divine yoke and shackle themselves with an unlimited hereditary monarchy. Okay. You've heard me say this before, and I know I'm not the only one who said it. Government is not the solution. Now, we've been seeing that in Judges. Government is not the solution. You see the cycle, the judges, the military leaders, whoever comes along, and is the means of God rescuing Israel from their oppressors, and we have a period of peace. But Israel goes right back to what it's doing. The government isn't the solution. They keep departing from the true solution, which is to fellowship with God. Okay? I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Now, I do want to also make a distinction here. There's a distinction between the law and government. You ever thought of that? Really, government is an enforcement. Government is an enforcer. The law is what the government should be enforcing. Ideally, should be enforcing God's law. Okay? But though they don't have like an organized government beyond just judges at this point, they still have the law. They still know what's right and what's wrong. It's been laid out for them, and it's up to them. And I think this is something that we should consider as we look at Gideon's answer to their request to him. They've asked him to be king, and he says, I will not rule over you, period. Good for him. I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Ideally, you should need a government to enforce that. You know the law. It's God communicating to you. There's a relationship there even. Do it. Okay? And this is, he's also making the point here that, no, God delivered you, not me. I'm not the one you should be looking to, right? We've got a problem already. We haven't seen it quite this acute when we go back to Barak, Ehud, Othniel. Now this is coming up in more detail, okay? I think there was humility on Gideon's part too as well. He had a chance to be king and rejected it. How many men in history have done or would have done what Gideon just did there? Not many, okay? He's come a long way. God has been building his faith. God has been reaching out to him where he's at. And so his answer is, the Lord shall rule over you. I am reminded when I read this, okay, here's the potential for a perfect world. There's a preacher I listened to some years ago. His name was Marvin Rosenthal. Anybody heard of him? Anybody heard of a ministry called Friends of Israel? Friends of Israel, yeah. Marvin Rosenthal was with them for a long time, and he preached a sermon I never forgot called The Glory of God. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little, change some things, but I'm going to freely rip off what he said in this sermon. Imagine if tomorrow morning, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, woke up and became a believer, and said, by God's grace, I am going to live and do only what God wants me to do. Don't faint. And the same morning, tomorrow morning, Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, wakes up and does the same thing. And the president of the United States, Joe Biden, and the leader of Japan, and in leaders in South America, and it filters down to all the people. And the people overwhelmingly wake up tomorrow morning believing in the Lord Jesus Christ and seeking to let the Lord rule over you. What would this planet be? Talk about utopia. You would just about have heaven on earth. I can't help wondering, and we should talk about this some more, but if somewhere in there God kind of wanted this to do, he knew how the experiment was going to go. No, nothing surprises God. But when he set them up in Judges, he didn't set them up with a constitutional representative republic or a democracy or capitalism or communism or whatever. He didn't set up any really kind of a government beyond the judges, okay? But he had the law, okay? And if this could be a place where everybody would be committed to live and let Yahweh rule them, what kind of wonderful witness would this land have been? Okay? There's the ideal. And I have to take a moment too to say, in the idea of that being a state of perfection, I see Kim and Kathy and Brother Dennis over there. Your mother, your wife has that now. She has that perfection. Lolita, wherever you're, and Christine Brent, your mom, your grandma, she has that now. She has that perfect relationship. Nothing's in the way, no corrupt governments, no messing around with the system, okay? And that's what God's going to have for all of us eventually, okay? In your grief, be excited. They have that, okay? This is the best thing Gideon has said in the whole passage to me, okay? It's not inspired, speaking for myself, okay? The Lord shall rule over you directly, okay? This is what you should be doing, okay? And so we come to verse 24, however, he does have a request. The second part here, starting off with Gideon's request, he says, I would request of you that you each give me an earring from his spoil. For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. That is, the Midianites are being referred to as Ishmaelites here. Okay, wearing a gold earring, cultural thing here, particularly apparently from the text of the Midianites and Amalekites, who they had just defeated. And, you're not talking about a professional army here. They're not getting paid every month. Okay, veterans, we know something about that, right? Okay. I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but, the spoil, the plunder that a warrior could legitimately take from defeated, killed soldiers, that was legitimate military pay, you could say in a way. And so the spoil is a word for plunder, okay, that you take, from the dead, from the camp once they vacated. What's left here in the camp, let's help ourselves to that. And it was a legitimate practice of warfare in those days. And so these warriors, these men who came asking him to be king, Gideon asked just for a part of their spoil, one earring from each of them. All right? I can't help, when I read this, seeing a parallel. Is this kind of an indicator of things to come? I remember another leader of Israel asking for gold earrings. We're talking about Exodus 32, if you want to put that down. Exodus 32, the golden calf and Aaron. Okay? That didn't end up very well. And we kind of have a warning here. I see a parallel, right? And they said in verse 25, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, every one of them, and threw an earring there from his spoil. Okay? Most of these guys certainly had more than one earring. Okay? 135,000 Midianites and Amalekites were defeated. And in verse 10 of this chapter, we're told that there were 15,000 left. That's 120,000 dead. That's a lot of gold earrings. And these warriors probably accumulated quite a few for them, amongst other things that are mentioned here as well. So, and it's interesting in their answer, they said, oh, we'll do that. Sure, easy. Okay? They showed some respect, some reverence for Gideon after what he had done. Okay? After all, he did want to make him king, but he wasn't doing that. Well, you won't be king, but we'll do this for you, sure. Okay? And it says in verse 26, the weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. Besides the crescent ornaments, pendants, purple robes, necklaces that they put on the camels, all these adornments, there was quite a haul here. Okay? I did some math to try to figure out, what this would be in our terms today. And one thing I sure learned is, math is a very rational science when applied to money, it's not real rational. Well, you got, okay, you all guys have heard the story about which weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of gold? It's a trick question because, as I think most of you know, gold is less ounces. Even though the ounce of gold is bigger than the standard ounce, there's less ounces and all this other stuff in the figuring, and I'm not that good at math. But after making a few mistakes and everything, most seem to agree there was about 42 pounds of gold here. Whether that was in troy ounces or standard ounces, I don't know, but I assumed the lowest numbers in every case, the most conservative system in every way, and the figure I came up with was $1,352,584.80. $1.3 million worth of gold. Okay, now that's a nice little retirement fund. Okay, Gideon, he turned down the kingship, but, he's asking for something. But this is not what he had in mind, as we can see. Okay. I think that as we look at the next verse, in verse 27, Gideon made it into an ephod and placed it in his city, Ophrah. And all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. Okay, he made an ephod. You can bring up that one slide I have, if you would. Okay. I wish I had a laser pointer, but the very colorful apron that he's wearing. Not the breastplate, but the apron. It's got straps on the shoulders and all. Oops. There I am knocking things over again. Okay, but that apron that goes down a little ways over top of the dark blue garment, that's the ephod basically. Okay? And this was the part of the required dress. There's much more to it, but I'll just focus on the ephod. This was part of the required dress of the priests. Now, certainly at this time, the tabernacle was around. I don't know where it would be located. I hadn't thought to check that out, but the tabernacle, the tent, the water basin, all the things where they did the sacrifices, this was still extant at the time. This was still there. And it says here he made an ephod from the gold that he got. Whether he used every bit of it or some of it and how big it was, we don't know. Okay, but it basically looked like this apron thing that this priest is wearing here. Okay, and we can speculate too. It's not real clear what his motives were, but I think from the text, it's not necessarily inspired, but from my reading of the text, I think that Gideon had a good motive, but he wasn't wise about it. Some speculate, some commentators, one says that he wanted to establish a place of worship there, which I don't know if that's legitimate. Brent said he wanted to do something like the Washington Monument, which I think is more in line with it. He just wanted some kind of tangible monument, reminder of what God had done in his life, or what God had done for Israel. Nothing wrong with that, right? But I put down here, I just thought of this morning, good motives can still produce a stumbling block. That's a bummer. That's a real bummer. This is why we have limitations on Christian liberty, which I'm going to be coming up on here in a few minutes. Okay? As a Christian, we are free in a lot of areas. You've heard me talk about, drinking alcohol, entertainment, things like that. Okay? Part of that is just you being ruled by the Lord. Okay? But sometimes we have to limit what we do. And I don't think Gideon was setting out to create an idol, or more specifically, a fetish, okay, on what he built here. Okay? But one thing is clear, and it's very sad. It says he made the ephod, placed in his city, and bang, right away the verse says, and all Israel played the harlot with it. So that it became a snare. No hesitation, no distance, just boom, right away. Another measure of how far Israel has come, how far they have fallen, sadly. Okay? This which could have been, I really think, was motivated by good motives, could have been a good thing, to remind you. It's not wrong if you have something, you may have a cross up, we don't here, but that's fine. If you have a cross there, to remind you, okay? But then can it become a fetish where it has certain kind of powers to you? Maybe like a crucifix. Again, I want to be careful. I don't want to offend anybody, but okay. And it will become a snare. Snare, it just says what it says. A stumbling block, a noose, a hook. Okay? Something you catch a rabbit in to get eaten later. Okay? And this word is often used in the Bible to describe anything that ensnares or entraps individuals, leading them to sin or danger. Okay? All right? And while snares can be, a tool for survival, is symbolically, again, they symbolize the dangers of idolatry and moral compromise. And the Israelites were frequently warned against snares of foreign nations and their gods, which could lead them away from their covenant with Yahweh. Perhaps you might even say that the practice of making monuments is questionable, not necessarily wrong. Okay? Now, it's true, I haven't seen anybody worshiping at the Washington Monument lately. Okay? So, apparently not a problem. Okay? But can people take it too far? Okay. We're getting to something here that I call the golden ephod zone, which I want to talk about. This is hard. I want to be careful because one of the signs of our corruption, our moral depravity, our sinners, is how we can take a good thing and ruin it. Yeah, I hear the agreement there. We can. We humans have that capacity. Okay. And what you had here, apparently, what developed with the ephod was, I think specifically, was a kind of idolatry we call a fetish. A fetish is something that you can get some power from. You may not worship it. You may not see it as your God, but it has some kind of mystical powers. Okay? Now, a modern equivalent of this, and I want to speak respectfully and gently here, but is within Mormonism, there is a belief in certain garments that they wear under their clothing that can afford them spiritual and physical protection. I don't know, some of you heard about this? The special kind of one-piece undergarment that the dedicated Mormons wear. And to be fair about it, this is not official Latter-day Saint doctrine. I'm talking about the Latter-day Saints that are stationed in Salt Lake City, the mainstream of Mormonism. But there is a belief amongst them that this wearing of this garment can provide a certain degree of spiritual and physical protection. Okay? I know this personally from discussing this with some Mormons. Okay? That is an example of a fetish. Okay? They don't worship it. It's not an idol to them that they bow down in front of or see as representing their God, but they attribute spiritual power to it. Okay? It's kind of hard sometimes to make the distinction. Now, we Christians, we never attribute wrongfully spiritual powers to some things that don't have it, do we? Boy, I've done it. You don't even think about it. You don't even realize you're doing it, okay? I put down here, do we look to the system or the God that's over the system? Are you relying on your job to provide for you or the God who provided the job? Okay? Now, I can't take out a yardstick or a measuring device of any kind and tell you when you cross the line and, oh, you're in the golden ephod zone. I can't do that. That would be legalism. Okay? You have to examine your heart before the Lord. You have to let the Lord rule over you, as Gideon said. Okay? Okay. In verse 28, it says, Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel. They did not lift up their heads anymore. There's a real measure here. In the Hebrew way of putting it, this is really emphasizing how defeated Midian was. Okay? and the land was undisturbed. Okay? Subdued, that's the idea of humiliation in here. And it emphasizes it with this later phrase, they didn't lift their heads up anymore. Their power was gone. Their military was vanquished, had been decisively wiped out. Okay? And the land was undisturbed. Okay? In the days of Gideon, as we'll see after Gideon passes, a lot of things break loose. Okay? And so there is prosperity returning. They don't have anybody raiding their crops anymore. Okay? Now they can actually put some things away and save it. Okay? And yet, they have been just given this by God, and yet they go into the golden ephod territory. Now, this is kind of brief today, but I'm going to wrap this up here by bringing up by meddling a little bit. So forgive me. Anita, maybe you should start the car and park it out back, but yes, believer, I can be the first to testify. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you can't wander into the golden ephod zone. That we can't have a fetish in a matter of speaking. Okay? You see, Israel played the harlot. I'm going to say this carefully. God designed us to enjoy pleasures. Okay? But there's only God's way of satisfying it. Marriage, for example. Okay? So when you talk about playing the harlot, you're talking about going after things you want or need that are legitimate, but you're going after them in the wrong way. Okay? And food, there's a big one. God gave us the ability to enjoy the taste of good food. And I am grateful for that. But can that take us into the golden ephod zone? Okay, I know it has with me. Okay. So you start with something that's legitimate, I'd say, and you don't realize how much you're drawing power from it, encouragement from it, satisfaction, that you should be drawing more directly from God. Okay? Certainly you need food. God's providing it for you. And it delights him that you like the taste of it. You've got these holidays coming up. I don't think God at all begrudges us that. But how important is it to you? How much encouragement do you draw from it? Okay? And I got some other examples down here too. I like this phrase that Brent brought out a few weeks ago. Retail therapy. 'Tis the season for retail therapy. Yeah. Okay. How important is the Christmas tree to you? I put a Christmas tree up every year. Okay. But would it be Christmas without it? Or the nativity scene? I like nativity scenes. A pet peeve of mine. Every year I'm trying to find a historically accurate nativity scene. One of the things being that the wise men are not there. But that's kind of a pet peeve of mine. But okay, can that be an idol? Is that sometimes a source, Christmas tree or whatever, all the accoutrements of Christmas time? Are those sources of encouragement and pleasure and satisfaction that really should be coming from God more directly? Not saying God can't delight you through some of that. See, there's the mess. You have got to seek the Lord. And perhaps be ready to remove anything that might be between you and him. Here's another one. Sorry, I'm really getting meddlesome now. The red jersey. Start the card, babe. Start the card. Okay, it is not wrong. I'm an American. I enjoy a good football game as much as the next guy. Okay. Patrick Mahomes throws that pass, and it connects with Travis Kelce, and they get across that goal line. Man, that's amazing. That's excellence. Okay? And I don't think God begrudges us, again, in taking pleasure in witnessing excellence. Okay? But how do I put this? I've seen people, some Christians and some not Christians, but their team loses, and it doesn't have to be the Chiefs, okay? It could be any other team, NFL, basketball, golf, UFC, what have you, and their team or their person loses and they're just like melting. They're just like depressed. I think you're in the golden ephod zone there. Okay? Yeah, it's okay to be happy if your team wins, but if it ruins your day, there's not a balance there. Okay? Oh, here's another one. Church denominations. You know, and even if you've got a church that's non-denominational like Koinonia, you know, maybe that's the only kind of church you look for. You know, you could probably preach a whole sermon on this, so I won't. But, you know, what you're used to. And that leads me to another thing, another pet peeve of mine, music. I once heard a person say this: if it ain't got an organ and a piano, it ain't worship. Of course, today, there's some who would say if it ain't got a drum and a guitar, it ain't worship. No offense back there, Dion. Okay, or Andrew, you know. But you know some people like that? They just can't get into it on Sunday morning if it doesn't have the right kind of music. I'm sorry, that's the ephod zone. It is. All right? And now the ultimate meddlesome here. You know, in all these things I've said, I'm not saying that God calls us to be the life of an ascetic, of someone who's like a monk, denying yourself everything, you know, and no pleasures and everything. No, okay? But you, again, I can't put the yardstick out there. You've got to measure how important these things are to you. Like who won an election. And I'm going to go after Democrats and Republicans and Green parties and Libertarians here. When your candidate wins, it's legitimate to be happy about that. Some of us, it's only relief, you know. But if you know, you take some satisfaction, that okay. But if you're jumping up, down, dancing, gloating, you know, just like, you know, utopia has arrived. No. No. Oh yeah, I've seen that, okay. You know, both ways. I've seen it, whoever. I've seen Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, whatever. I've seen both ways, you know. No, you're in the golden fleece, the golden ephod zone. I was saying golden fleece. I'm going Greek on you here, I'm sorry. The golden ephod zone. And the other way, too. If your candidate didn't win, and you go into seclusion for 3 or 4 days, that never happens, right? I mean, okay, no, you're just expecting too much from this fetish. You're expecting too much from it, okay? Again, I like what Sheila put in the group chat, okay? God is still on the throne. And I remember some years ago, decades ago, when a candidate won that I didn't want, I didn't vote for, but I was challenged because, you know what? That person, in a manner of speaking, is God's anointed. They wouldn't be there if God didn't want them there. Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, Independent, what have you. And if you're really connected with God, if the Lord is in charge of you, if you are letting the Lord rule over you, then you're still going to have peace about it. Okay? Whatever. I hope that can encourage some of you here after this week. All right? The golden ephod zone, you know, it says in Romans 12, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And you've heard this said before, it's not original to me. The problem with a living sacrifice is it keeps crawling off the altar. It keeps crawling off the altar. And we want to crawl into the golden ephod zone, if not outright idolatry. Okay? Again, I can't measure this. I can't stand here and say you've crossed into the zone or you haven't. You have to seek that before God. It would be legalism for me to say if you do such and such, then you're idolatrous. No. Okay. The key is here, I think, what Gideon said, and there's quite a contrast here. Gideon said something and did something that hindered it. Okay. The Lord shall rule over you. Okay. And if you do this, as I close here, as the worship team comes up, brother comes up, do this. Let the Lord rule over you, seeking him, being at peace with the decisions he makes, whatever they are, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, whether there's a drum or no drum, whether the Buccaneers win or not. Okay? If you let the Lord rule over you, then you're going to succeed whoever's in power, whoever's going on. And you'll stay out of the golden ephod zone.